Thank you to my channel members and Ko-fi supporters that make these videos possible. Hello everyone! There's been a sentiment that has popped up quite frequently in comment sections across the Commander YouTube space. Sometimes it appears as a question, sometimes it appears as an absolutist declaration. What is this hot button topic I've seen? The definition of casual Commander. Every other format in Magic puts emphasis on its competitive nature. No one faults their opponent for playing the best deck in Modern or Legacy, but Commander as a format is different in one major way. The fact that a majority of players agree that it is virtuous to kneecap your own power in deck building. That much is not up for debate. But what is up in the air, very much so, though, is how far or how little self-restraint is assumed to be the perfect amount for casual. Not too weak as to be playing with random cards, but not so strong as to be high power. Just the perfect Goldilocks zone in the middle here. A true 7 out of 10 game, if we're being sarcastic. To get my answer to this query, I performed the most scientifically accurate test possible to man. A poll. I've reached out to a ton of different awesome creators in the Magic sphere, 13 to be exact, who you might recognize, and asked their opinion on what casual means to them. Let's meet who will be giving their opinions.
Hey, this is Tomer. I'm working at MTG Goldfish. I run their Commander channel, and you can find me on MTG Goldfish Commander on YouTube, and you can also find me on Twitter at Budget Commander.
Hi, I'm the Trinket Mage. I make video essays about Magic the Gathering, and I also do a podcast with you.
I am Salubrious Snail. I run a YouTube channel called Salubrious Snail, where I make videos about EDH philosophy and EDH deck building, and I tend to build lots of budget decks with unconventional commander choices.
My name is Forrest Imel. I'm currently a full-time senior visual development artist at Blizzard. Previously, I've worked in the games industry for maybe 12 plus years now at this point as an artist. Now I am also, I guess, somewhat known for being a co-host on a podcast / YouTube channel called Distraction Makers with my friend Gavin.
I'm Gavin. I am co-host of the Distraction Makers podcast, and I am an independent artist and game designer.
My name is BaaL. I'm a Magic player and also content creator for Split Second.
I am MyHandsAreBlank. I am an internet funny guy. You can find me on TikTok, mostly posting skits, but I also post art over to Instagram and Twitter, but I'm trying to transition off of Twitter onto Blue Sky.
Hello, I'm Attack on Cardboard, also on the same YouTube channel of the same name, and I'm here to talk to you about layers.
Oh no.
Hi, I'm Rebel. So I am a Magic the Gathering content creator. I'm known for the decks that I build for a lot of people like Prof, Olivia, Gavin. You might have seen a lot of it on Shuffle and Play. And most recently, I'm also a member of the CFIP. That's what I'm calling it. It'll catch on. It's a Commander format panel. So previously I was on the CAG, and now I'm this new panel. And you can find me on my channel, Rebell Lily on YouTube.
My name is Shaff, aka That Mill Guy. You can find me usually musing about something related to mill or some alternate win conditions on my primary YouTube channel at That Mill Guy. You can even find me playing some One Piece TCG on more That Mill Guy, but hey, that's my smaller stuff. Find me blabbering about mill on Twitter or something related to Magic news on the primary channel.
I am Maldhound. I am most commonly on TikTok, but I'm also on YouTube and Instagram. I touch cards. I do my best to touch people's hearts, but more than anything, I tell you whether or not I'd touch your commander's parts.
I'm Brian Coval. You can find me on the internet as Bosch and Roll. Primarily on YouTube, I release a new deck 5 days a week in non-rotating constructed formats that is primarily Legacy, but also Modern, Vintage, Pioneer, occasionally Dual Commander or something cool. If it doesn't rotate, I could play it.
My name is Evert. I like to think of myself as a Magic the Gathering brewer that's been mostly in the Modern format the last few years, and I stream myself building and testing decks over at twitch.tv/AspiringSpike.
With introductions out of the way, I asked everyone a simple question to open things up. What cards or playstyles do you not expect to see at a casual commander table?
I think of no specific cards. I just think of fast mana and tutors when people say they're playing a casual deck.
Yeah, mostly it's fast mana. Like, I don't think Lotus Petal or Chrome Mox indicate a casual level of play to me, unless the commander costs 9 mana or something to justify it.
I think I don't typically expect to see fast mana when I sit down for a casual game of Magic. Like, I would expect to see Soul Ring, obviously, but maybe something like mana. I guess Vault now that Crypt is banned, but things that accelerate you way past where everyone else is, or 2-card combos are the kind of things that I would not typically expect to see in a casual game.
I would say the strong CDH combos, but if someone were to play an Underworld Breach for value without even having LED nor Brain Freeze, I think it would be definitely okay. So I would say the 1+1 kind of combos that we have in CDH, seeing them on a casual table would be like a red flag, I would say.
Generally, the mechanics that I expect not to see are probably deterministic combo wins that include probably 3 or less cards. I'm thinking 2-card combos like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation that immediately win the game, or mass land destruction that pushes folks back in resources that they can't come back from easily.
I mean, the first thing I always bring up is, are you running a 2-card infinite combo? I'd like to think if we're playing casually, we're not playing a 2-card infinite combo. And stacks. I think that would be the other big one.
Effects I don't expect to see. I think the biggest one is stacks. Like, I don't expect to ever see a Winter Orb, Trinisphere, tax effects, all of that, I don't expect to see. Interestingly enough, land destruction or mana denial, like Blood Moon, I don't think it fits within a casual game, but I wouldn't be super surprised if I kind of suss it out from my opponent from a certain type of deck, right? Some people just you can kind of tell, I don't know how, but I can always kind of tell you seem like a Blood Moon person.
So personally, I think it's almost too broad for me to have any sort of non-expectation. If there's something that I would expect for a casual game, I don't think most people would play something like a Blood Moon, right? Or like a Winter's Orb. Anything that is sort of a lockdown or stack style, potentially gameplay, is not usually that common. So I'd be surprised to see it at an average table, I think.
I think casual is somewhat subjective. I would ask for clarification, but in general, I would not expect fast mana. I would probably... I've seen free spells in games I would consider casual, and it didn't totally throw the vibe, but I would say fast mana is the most clear thing that I would identify as being not so casual, and then some of the higher powered draw engines like One Ring.
I'm not sure about individual cards. I think the strength or casualness of a deck often goes beyond any one individual card. I've seen a deck that had a Rhystic Study that was still definitely a casual deck, because that deck was ass. It was just random tin cans the person had collected, and then Rhystic Study made it work, but I'd still class the deck as casual. In terms of mechanics, I would say if you take more than one extra turn, you're probably pushing it.
It's tough because I want to say maybe Rhystic Study probably doesn't really fit the casual mold, but I have a lot of friends who play Rhystic Study in their casual decks, and it's they know it's a number one target, so, and then we just target them down, and it's usually just fine. So no, I don't know. Maybe I think some people would consider MLD or something to be taboo, but I started playing Commander in groups where MLD was very common. So I'm very much used to it. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough answer now. I would have said fast mana, but a lot of the problem ones just got banned. So Yeah, I don't know. Probably fast mana still.
Generally speaking, the only thing I really don't expect to see are mass land destruction spells, and that's about it.
The one thing I think that immediately comes to mind is any kind of like mass land destruction. I think it's kind of an obvious one. I also think that, there's kind of a stigma against stacks type strategies. That one bothers me less, but I can see why other players may not be as interested.
A lot of the usual suspects were mentioned here, mostly 2-card infinite combos, fast mana, and MLD, with a sprinkling of stacks. I'm sure a few of you in the audience may have whinged at Snail mentioning that free spells don't entirely kill the casual vibe for him, or at Maldhound and Tomer not totally being shocked to see a Rhystic Study hit the table. I really do think my current lens on the topic of casual commander's social taboo aligns most with Snail's and Forrest's opening comments. Casual is a vague label, where a lot of nuance dwells. I think the closest you can get to defining a casual deck is one that is purposely built with suboptimally as a feature of it. Which leads me to the next question I asked these creators. Are there any deck building limitations you put yourself under when building your casual commander decks?
So I've taken out Soul Ring out of all my decks, and I avoid Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe. Those are the ones that I almost never run. I don't think I run them in any of my decks anymore. Trouble in Pairs is one that I've been sitting on, where it's probably a bit too strong too, and I kind of feel a little bit bad when I just play a Trouble in Pairs and it just wins me the game by doing nothing. I just paid 4 mana, Nobi got rid of it, and I just win. Maybe the One Ring too, but yeah, I think it's mostly Soul Ring, Rhystic Study, and Smothering Tithe. Those are the ones I will always avoid in my own decks, at least.
I generally try to avoid 2-card combos. If I do put them in when I rule 0 at the start of the game, it's usually hey, how do we feel about infinite combos? And they're usually just something I can swap out for something else. I try to avoid as many free spells or counter spells as I can. Obviously, a couple of counter spells here and there, because sometimes they're needed, but not just being that guy who counters every single spell.
Typically, I try to keep them within the cards that are already in my collection. I also sometimes try to keep myself from putting infinite combos and stuff into my decks, but I don't discount myself from using other weird win conditions. I found out that you can apparently put a Maze's End package into a mono black deck, and I'm working on putting that into my mono black EDH deck, just because I think that's kind of neat and fun.
I try to limit my fast mana. And we can't do it anymore anyway, but Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus were not cards featured in my casual decks. Tutors I try to avoid unless they're on theme, like Koldoth the Forge Master in my Bosch Iron Golem deck. I accept that sort of tutoring, but I don't just put Demonic Tutor in every black deck. I like cards coming off the top to create a more random experience rather than tutoring together the same game plan every time. And my other rule is if I draw a card and would feel bad about casting it, then I cut it from my deck.
I just give myself the challenge of making something, either if it's a fun idea, sometimes it can be a mechanic that it's focused around, and sometimes it's more of a flavor. So I made a vanilla creatures deck because I just wanted to see what that would be like.
Although this might be a bit strange to hear, I was a really big fan. It was one of my first ever decks, Darian, King of Keldor, which is a 6-mana human creature that basically all the damage that I take, it creates that many soldier tokens. But in this deck, I was playing Mana Vault and Mana Crypt just as an easy way, of course, to accelerate into the commander, which was a commander-centric deck, and both of those cards would deal me damage and consequently creating tokens. So it was, the Mana Vault was actually a one-time use, and I would never want to untap it. Just would give me soldiers each draw step, and the Mana Crypt, of course, would give me more value over time to play these actually slow enchantments on white that you actually have access to. But looking at the deck, I would say even having those cards in, I would say it's still a casual deck.
I make a very big point to pick a gimmick, whether that is a flavor theme, whether that is a specific mechanic I want to execute around. I pick a gimmick, and then everything has to be related to that gimmick. And that will naturally begin excluding cards like Rhystic Study or like Smothering Tithe, because I generally try to pick gimmicks that are more specific than I draw cards and play good cards. I try to pick my gimmicks like I'm naming an episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And after you pick that type of gimmick, if you force yourself to only pick cards that facilitate that game plan, that typically helps you avoid all of the staples.
When I'm building a deck, I try to think about how can I put something together that other people will enjoy playing against?
Generally not an over excessive amount of interaction that is just interaction. And what I mean to say is counter spells that are just counter target spell by itself, or removal that is just exile target creature. One thing that I like to do is integrate these options into my synergy.
If I'm playing an artifacts deck, right, I really like, I think it's called Access Denied. There's like a 5-mana counterspell that makes Thoughtkers, right? The card's awful. It's like not really good when compared to like straight up counterspell. Even a cancel is better than like Access Denied, right? Because 5 mana is so much mana. But because the deck is like artifact theme, and I might be playing like a little bit of Thoughtkers synergy, like whenever that opportunity comes up, I try to lean myself to play more of those cards. I guess you call, like, you know, everyone calls them pet cards. That's the only limitation I put on myself, is like wherever I can to like get a little bit more flavor out of my deck, I'll try to like do that.
So one of the most recent commander decks I made was a Slinvada commander deck, who is a uncommon legendary who cares about krakens, leviathans, and octopuses. And I kind of made a distinct decision to balance out the completely unplayable sea monsters like Polar Kraken, Yoko Mordor, alongside some of these creatures that actually have some text, like the ones that bounce all the other permanents and the one that like searches for cards with mana value 9. I wanted to have an equal number of like completely unplayable sea monsters that make you sacrifice all your lands, and ones that actually can impact a commander game. And I found that restriction was really fun. Me and some of my other friends, we all kind of built similar kind of restrictive thematic commander decks. One person built a commander deck that was Ravnica themed, but the theme was how all of the different guilds don't work together. So he had each charm, each guild mage, each signet, each like thematic card, but there was just no synergy because it's just one piece from each of the guilds.
I have a budget restriction generally, for the sake of my wallet and because I just like it. I like having that restriction. It's not a super hard restriction. Like some decks I'll go, okay, I need a little bit more money to make this work. And if the deck seems worthwhile, then I will build it and buy it. But in general, I'm a budget player. Beyond that, I don't have any super strong restriction.
Perhaps it's not shocking that a lot of the deck building restrictions these creators place on themselves in casual deck building match very well to what they said was their expectation of the format. The interesting outliers to these opinions, though, were the people who were more strict on themselves than they were with others. For example, Tomer stated that he doesn't run Rhystic Study at all, but previously said that he accepted seeing it across the table from him during a casual game. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, that perhaps maybe we can be more strict on policing our power levels than others. I actually think that reflects a pretty healthy mindset about the game as well. The deck at the table you know the best is your own. Someone might put a powerful card on the board, or produce some crazy nigh unbeatable line, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were trying to sneak a competitive deck into a weaker table. For example, BaaL's King Darien deck could have an explosive opener with Mana Crypt and Mana Vault, but it would be because he drew the better half of his tin can pile, as it were. And we could talk about the ethics of running a inconsistently explosive deck like that for a while, but I feel like that's going to stray me off topic for this video. I also personally find that the inclusions of those cards can be cool in that kind of deck, and wouldn't feel as strongly about seeing them once he mentions that it was just for his self-damage synergy. But I know others might feel differently. A lot of the creators I talked to stated during this question that they tend to stick to a tight theme or gimmick for a deck, which helps them police power without actually having to put concrete restrictions on themselves. There is a sort of rule of cool aspect in Commander. Spice 8-Rack put it really well that exiling a Krenko with the Swords to Plowshares is expected, but the crowd will go wild if you hit it with a Tivadar of Thorn. Keep in mind, too, that I'm interviewing creators in the Commander space here. Of course, their decks are going to be showboaty and flashy. It's not really an accurate sample size of all Commander players. It is totally reasonable to build a deck without a cool vision or tight theme, but instead chase a specific play pattern, like Light Pause auras, or around a specific combo or mechanic. Once again, the only definition of what makes a deck casual, that it makes concessions in its deck building to weaken itself. But once again, we run into vagueness in this definition. A casual deck can be tuned, or it can be a pile. It can be trying to chase a theme, or it can be trying to build around a mechanic. Casual is not a helpful label when multiple decks with different goals like this meet at a table. Personally, I think huge strides can be made in defining a healthy casual experience by looking at what makes people upset in Magic. That brings us to my next question I asked these folks. How do you think the vibe can get killed at a casual table? What's the turning point where a casual Commander game turns into a social and gameplay nightmare?
I feel like more commonly than one person popping off is one person just going, oh god, I'm totally outclassed. My deck is worse and I am not drawing well enough to make up for that. I feel like I see that more often than like some pub stomper going absolutely crazy with some nonsense. But usually I say the time when it's, you know, some pub stomper is just when somebody misrepresents their power level, when they kind of imply that they have some sort of fun thing, and then you see the high power stuff coming out, the stacks coming out when they didn't preface that at all, that sort of thing.
When someone comes to the table and they expect their opponents to fit into very tiny boxes, and then they get upset when that doesn't happen. Like, if you want to play no combos, no tutors, no this, no that, blah, 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 and that is a very strict rule for you, you should make that very clear.
Funnily enough, I was recently recording a video about this. I think one way a casual table can spiral out of control is if the communication around win condition isn't specified. So for example, someone might be talking about a creature win condition where they talk about I win through combat at the beginning of the game, and then later down the line, they may bring out an infect win condition. They may equip a giant infect equipment onto one of their bigger creatures, come over with trample, and a lot of people might get into arguments about whether or not that's actually winning with combat through commander damage or whatever it might be. So just a miscommunication on commander win condition.
The way the vibe has most commonly gotten killed, or the way the vibe has degraded at games where everyone made a really big show of playing casual decks, is they play decks that just have a lot of like medium moves. They don't have anything that can really bring the game to a close, and every game needs that, even the casual ones.
I think when two players have like a disagreement with like what their expectation of the game is. So, for example, I think the easiest way this happens is someone plays like a Swords to Plowshares on their commander, and they're not really in like a great position, but their commander is like scary, right? Maybe you give them 2 more turns, that commander is gonna be a big problem, right? And they're like, you know, what are you doing? You know, I'm not going to do anything. Why'd you do that? And it like devolves into an argument of like, well, you know, whatever. I just thought it would be a good target, or like, you know, the other person expected them to think a little bit more. It doesn't really matter who's right or wrong, but generally it's that type of discussion that always kind of kills the vibes. When two players like don't really move on from the kind of initial like difference in expectation and just kind of like get into it.
You actually see a lot of players that they're kind of forcing themselves to play in a suboptimal way, closer to what they kind of play like on something like game nights or other like content creator gameplay videos. But the game nights is lying to you for entertainment purposes, right? They don't want the game to drag on. They want it to be a good story that you tell. If you're sitting at home with friends and you guys got nothing better to do, like someone might drop the third board wipe, you know, because whatever, like they want to win, they're there, they're hanging out, they're playing the game. So it's weird to be in a situation where you're like, well, okay, I could play this board wipe and know that that person now has to rebuild, and like maybe I could still win the game, but I won't do that. Like I'll just let them win. And it kind of puts players in this weird situation where you end up having duds. You don't know how to move the game forward. And instead you have to sort of end up making these like suboptimal plays because in your eyes that somehow makes the game better. But then if someone finds out that you could have played that, you might have a player that gets upset thinking, oh, well, you could have stopped me, but you decided that I'm going to just win at that point. And it just becomes this weird like social dynamic that conflicts with what the game system is really encouraging you to do.
I think when it's mostly people's attitudes. I think like if you're just chill and you're realizing that Commander is a social game and everybody is here to sit down and basically just socialize and have fun with each other, then Commander is always going to be fun regardless of what's actually happening in the game state itself. But like once people start getting very salty or they take things very personally and you know like the vibe gets thrown off, then I think that's when the game starts spiraling.
Someone just doesn't pass the vibe check, basically, if they're being too sweaty when everyone else is having fun, or if somebody's like, can I do this instead? And somebody's like, no, you made your play. That's how it can very quickly get weird.
The first thing that I can think of that comes to mind is when we're all trying to go home. It's 11 o'clock at night and someone decides to cast Farewell or any board wipe for everybody. Not like a Cyclonic Rift where they're just going to win the game after that, but something that resets the game to 0. And it's 11 o'clock at night. I've got work in 6 hours time. I just want to go home and go to bed.
Oh, it's definitely games that last too long. 100%. Board wipes, things that just, when a game goes past, I feel like an hour and a half is the absolute max. And then once you start getting past that and people are like, the game is just going on, but nobody's like, feels like the game is moving towards a conclusion, people start checking out.
I definitely think if the board becomes very clogged down, that kind of turns it into like who will blink first and the game can kind of become a slog. But I also can see a situation where somebody feels slighted and it becomes this whole issue of you shouldn't attack me because, you know, I did this thing 5 turns ago for you. And then it's like, well, yeah, but you're clearly in the lead and the other person's a little bit behind. And when it gets to that point, I'm like, can we just like flip a coin or something, man? I don't care. Attack me at this point.
Here, there were 3 major points that shine through. People are upset when they feel an opponent misrepresented their deck as weaker than it is, and also simultaneously are upset with decks that aren't strong enough to turn an advantage into a win, bogging the game down into a slog. The third point isn't really tied into this dichotomy. It's just that people don't want to play with folks with bad attitudes. So disregarding the third point, since you can't and shouldn't actively police salty energy vampires, what we have here is a balancing act. You simultaneously have an obligation to the table to make a deck that is both not conflicting with your opponent's interests, and also to have a deck that is powerful enough that it can win the game. You should also have perhaps a way to aptly describe your deck, while still maintaining some of the fun surprise factor it has. I mean, you put 99 cards together, so you can probably also come up with a good sentence or two to describe it. I feel it is here in the pregame that you should do as Trinket Mage said. You should clearly define what you don't want to play against or find fun. It works the other way as well. If an opponent makes it known that they don't want to play against a deck with Winter Orb, that's up to you to disclose beforehand if it describes your deck. Anyone is entirely in their right to exclude cards that they don't find fun from their experience. That really is the bow on the what is casual commander question. Casual describes any deck that is weaker than competitive, but if you don't have opponents that find your deck fun, despite fitting the bill, you're not going to be playing much Commander at all, unless you're fine violating boundaries and lying, in which case based, I guess. Also, it's important to note that a deck can be casual, it can be weak, and it can still be unfun to play against. If your place to play is a local game store or just with randoms online through a client, I think it's the sad truth that you'll just have to sometimes make concessions in your fun some games. But if you get the opportunity to curate a group of friends that you can regularly play with who fit the vibe you want, that's where the best Commander games are for certain. You can also break a bit out of the comfort box and ask yourself how you can upgrade your deck to match your meta too. There's fun to be had there as well. Before I close this all out, I went ahead and asked everyone to give their final general thoughts on Casual Commander as well. I think there are a lot of really cool points and opinions given on the topic for this question, so I highly recommend sticking around after this video to give them a listen. If you liked all this, you might like my recent video about Universes Beyond, where I talk about the aesthetic importance of Commander decks, my video on how to prevent Slogfest in Commander, or you might like my video about Cube, which talks in depth about how that format gives you perfect control over the environment you want to play in. I hope you pulled some deeper meaning about what casual means and what value you find in this game from conversations with these cool creators. If you did, please let me know down in the comments below. Until next time, bye! Alright, and the last question is just kind of general, pretty broad. Is there anything that you have that you want to mention about Casual Commander, like the culture, like anything like that you didn't get to answer because of these questions? Just like...
Oh my gosh. Do you have like 45 minutes? Look, Commander and its culture has been a lie for years and years and years. And I don't know, I think this probably stemmed from content creators and from a misunderstanding of the game's system and its design. I think its initial intent and how it was pitched to players is that it's meant to be more of a casual thing. So you have more variance because of the singleton format. You see content creators that are, talking and taking jabs at each other, and it's more social and political, and that's really exciting. And that can kind of make for a little bit looser of a more casual format as well. And I think all of that is great. However, I just don't think that it's true, right? It's still a game that ultimately has to have one winner, and it's built on top of a system of a game that was leaning in a more competitive direction. And so we're seeing a lot of players that are trying to say, well, this isn't Commander, stacks isn't Commander, or 2-card infinite combos aren't Commander. That's like too competitive. And I think that what that is it's talking a little bit more about player preferences and player expectations of what they've been marketed to as to what Commander is. And I think a lot of that has been from culturally, like what we've consumed by content creators or what we've been told by friends, and it's sort of trickled out from there.
I mean, we have a video that's sort of talking about how Rule Zero has kind of, in our perspective, been somewhat harmful to the game in general, and that the biggest criticism is not necessarily that people want to use it to sort of craft an experience. It's that you can use it to close yourself off from other play patterns, like things that what is sort of the more interesting things that I see from Magic, right? These more highly interactive games, these situations, and like where your sort of local meta can evolve and change based on what other players are doing. Where like if you're in the situation where somebody's playing a deck that's doing something that you really dislike, instead of going to Rule Zero and saying, hey, I don't like this thing, instead you're like, well, what can I do? What can I change to like beat that thing, right? And it's a very competitive mindset, of course. And if that's not your goal, then I think it can work, with each individual given group. But I do think that like the upcoming bracket system and Rule Zero shifting to be something that's like easier to define, I think is overall a good thing, I guess.
I think my perfect casual table doesn't need any sort of a Rule Zero conversation. I think if you can just sit down, you announce what your commander is, and every other person's like, yeah, sure. I think that's like when you have found the perfect power level commander.
How do you think you get that?
By playing with the same group of people every single week for 2 years straight.
Yeah. It's a bit hard to get there, but once you are, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because like I'm not too well versed in CDH, but I was going to say like in casual, I think it's much more relaxed in terms of like you could do take backsies if you didn't like know that a card was on the board or whatever, or like you misread a card. Like I think being casual is kind of like accepting that mistakes are going to be happening and being okay with letting people, take stuff back, or also not really caring that much if you make mistakes too, because it's a casual game. It doesn't really matter. But also at the same time, my experience with CDH has been very similar, where maybe it's because we were doing recording purposes, but like the CDH tables that I play with, like play to win or whatever, if we misread something, we're allowed to take it back. It's fine. It's like we're not playing in a tournament setting. So even CDH, like played casually, is pretty laid back. So I guess I think that's it. I don't know. I think if it's a casual game, I think you just don't be too serious about, perfect gameplay and perfect and no take backsies and all that stuff. Like, don't be too sweaty. It's casual.
I think people need to ignore what they read online and just play Commander at stores casually. I feel like there's a lot of negativity online in terms of like, I went to my store and this guy pub stomped, I went to the store and this person yelled at me and blah blah blah. And you see the most negative experiences, but in general, most people are like relatively well-adjusted human beings that just want to play a silly card game. And if your deck is constructed in a reasonable manner such that you have removal and card draws so you don't get instantly shut down by one card, you'll probably have a fine time, and it's unlikely your deck will be too strong for most play groups. So just go out there and play games.
Yeah, it's all vibes. I kind of answered this in one of my other answers already, but if the table is having fun no matter what, then it doesn't matter what deck you're playing. If you don't really know each other, being really cautious about some nonsense, and if you cast something that you thought was okay, but the whole table rolls their eyes, maybe like, oh, my bad, I didn't know. And one of the things that I've used over the years to solve for that is, if my deck's built just a little more powerful than the 3 people I'm playing with, if I draw something like an extra turn spell or something that wouldn't really play at the table I'm at, I will just ask to discard it and draw a new card. And the other 96 cards in my deck, other than the 3 that are out of bounds, are still just fine for that table. And that's something you can do.
I think, so I'm on the CFIP, right? I swear to God, it'll catch on. And a lot of what the CAG, CFIP, all this work I've done around thinking about Commander and getting good games is that we try to create all the structure to find like the perfect game, right? Like it feels really bad whenever you go to a game store, you sit down and you just like, you don't really find the right game, right? And you spend 2 hours playing this game and you're like, oh, that kind of sucked, right? Like no one really likes that. And rightfully so, everyone's trying to like find the answer to get by that problem, right? Try to make it as easy as possible for just a table of strangers to have a good game and be buddies, and then like stop going to the LGS and hang out somewhere else, right? Like that's kind of what happens a lot, is like you meet some people you really like and you start just playing at their house, right? It's that kind of thing. So my thinking around casual play is just like, we gotta just let loose a little bit. Because I think there's like a lot of structure and a lot of thinking and really smart systems that we can design for people. But I think a lot of casual players, just like, they don't consume Magic content to the same degree that a lot of us do online. They like play Magic once or twice a month. Think about it like once a month, and then all they're doing is coming to jam some games and leaving, right? That's all they want to do. And I think the more we're willing to just be like, well, we're probably going to mess up every now and then, but be open to just like having a good time and like fixing it afterwards, I think that'll be like a really easy way to just enjoy, playing casual. I like earlier on, you asked me that question about like what kills the vibes. It's usually when each player has like a very kind of strict or clear idea of how the game should be played, right?
I do want to ask, this isn't a question I've asked anyone else, by the way. I do want to get like a sort of like discernible history of like your experience with Commander, because you are specifically known as the modern streamer, kind of, and like also vaguely as a legacy Ant champion, So I am a little bit curious about, like, you mentioned it was really casual, like it was just you and friends hanging out, but What is your experience?
At one point, I was very, very into Commander. There was a time in 2012 to 2013 where that was basically the only format I played. I was a standard player from like Return to Ravnica to Crash and the core set after that. I loved Standard in that era. And then Theros came out and I was kind of disenfranchised with Standard. I didn't enjoy it so much. So I started to really dive deep into Commander, and I just had a Lazov deck that was Dimir that I ended up upgrading to an Orloro Esper deck, and I really like slowly built it to be the best I could possibly do. I was scouring eBay for good deals. I bought an Italian Mana Drain for like $42, and back then that was like a crazy deal. I got a Mana Crypt, I got original dual lands for everything. I really built this Orloro deck as well as I could. And then after that I built like a Safi deck that was a little bit lower power level with like no fast mana, no tutors, but it was really fun, lots of like creature synergies. And then I just bought like a Brea intro deck. And so me and my friends, we just kind of have like high power, mid-level intro decks, and we would just kind of do whatever was appropriate at the time. And then kind of after that, I started to get back more into competitive Magic, and so did my friends. And so the Commander nights became kind of fewer and farther between. And since then, I feel like I've kind of lost touch with the format, but it is a format that I used to enjoy a lot. I used to play a lot, and it's something that I kind of casually like to keep up with while I focus mostly on Modern, of course.
Oh man, it's so cool to hear. That's also really why I wanted to reach out to you for this video as well. It's just because like you had this experience with Commander, and then you sort of pivoted it over to Modern, and you see a lot of like the brewing like fun stuff in your Modern deck specifically. I feel that like Commander players typically only get to experience. I don't know. I feel like brewing can happen in any format. I feel like people sort of like say like, oh, Commander's for all these like, horrible rares that don't see play anywhere else. And that's true mostly, but like, man, you can do some cool stuff in other formats. I was just geeking out about Kalia like just a moment ago in Modern.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anyone can brew in any format. I think that you can have different goals too. You can just try to play kind of casually, but brewing competitively, for me, it's very fun. It's very, very rewarding, but it's very difficult to do so without being like an expert in the format. And I think to some extent, that's what's really nice about Commander is you don't have to be you can be as involved with it or as uninvolved with it as you want to be. But if you want to be brewing in Modern, Standard, Pioneer, Legacy, you have to like spend so much time to be able to like innovate and like keep on top of